So I'm Sophi Tranchell and I'm the CEO of Divine Chocolate. And what's special about Divine Chocolate is that on top of making really nice chocolate, the cocoa farmers in Ghana, who are organised in a cooperative, own 45% of the company. And so that means that they have seats on the board and they get a share of the profits. So they are directly involved in the chocolate company, which is quite unusual. So really the story of Divine started back in 1993 when the cocoa market in Ghana was liberalised and a charismatic farmer thought it was a good opportunity to set up a cooperative run by farmers for farmers. And so he established Kwapa Cocoa, which means good cocoa farmer, in Twi, which is their local language. And he set them up on Fairtrade principles with gender empowerment in there. And so they originally set up in 22 villages with 2,000 members, and one of the first things they did was buy weighing scales, and it meant that the farmers could trust the transaction. So for the first time farmers could trust the transaction, and they carried around 25 kilo weighing stones, so you could ask to have the scales checked and prove that they were accurate. And so very quickly Kwapa Cocoa got a reputation for being honest and efficient, and lots of people joined. So by the time I joined Divine in 1999, they were operating in 250 villages with 25,000 members. So Divine is a social enterprise, and so that means we're a mission-driven business. And our mission when we were established was to improve the livelihoods of cocoa farmers in West Africa by establishing a dynamic branded Fairtrade chocolate marketing company, which puts the farmers higher up the value chain, because historically cocoa farmers have just sold cocoa because they don't grow chocolate on trees. And so what we're doing is actually putting the farmers owning part of the bit that's more valuable, and so that makes it quite a different sort of business. So Divine's here to improve the livelihoods of cocoa farmers, and one of the mechanisms that we do that through is fair trade. And so with fair trade, every tonne of cocoa that we use, we pay an additional $200 a tonne, which is called a fair trade premium. And what's important about the fair trade premium, and that works across other commodities too, is that the farmers decide democratically how they spend that money. And so in the case of the farmers we work with, they vote to spend some of it as bonuses to themselves, so they get an extra bonus on top of the normal price for their cocoa. But they also decide to spend that money on building their business and on building community development projects. So they've done things like sink water wells, they've built schools, because access to schools in rural areas is very poor in Ghana. They've done medical health clinics, because access again to hospitals, you've had to travel a long way, so if you can have a roving medical clinic, then you actually get access to it. So the important thing about the fair trade premium is they decide how to spend that money. In addition to fair trade in Divine, we invest 2% of our turnover in what we call producer support and development, and so that's on mutually agreed programs which help the farmers build their business and do better business. So historically that money's been invested in things like helping them build their management information systems through having databases where they can see how many members they've got and how much cocoa they're delivering, and whether they're delivering more or less than last year, and whether they bought more or less inputs and things. In addition to that 2%, then the farmers also get any 44% of any profit dividend that's distributed, and they then decide how to spend that money. So they tend to put that money in the bigger pot and then make a collective decision about how they're spending all of that money. One of the things that Kwapa Cocoa has been very good about is that they've really been invested in empowering women, and so right from the beginning they've set that as one of their principles, and they've done a quota at a village level, so that if you have the executive of the committee of the village, then 3 out of 5 of them have to be women. And the same goes all the way through up the organisation. And then when they have their annual general meeting, instead of sending one person from each village, they send 2 people to ensure that one of them is a woman. And so that's really enshrined the idea of women's participation in the organisation. We then did a piece of work with them where we looked at the fact that although women were well represented in the organisation, they were 35% of the membership, they weren't actually taking up leadership positions in the same way. And so we tried to look at what was the barriers, and one of the barriers was the level of literacy. And so because women were much more illiterate and innumerate, they were then not confident to take positions, and men also weren't going to vote for them because they weren't. And so one of the things we've done at the moment is we've invested that money into a literacy programme and numeracy programme, which is for men and women, but is disproportionately women taking it up, to try and get them to take up more leadership positions. So that would be a good example of how that money's been used. In a way, I mean, so we're putting it on its head. So the farmers own Divine, we don't own the farmers. And so the farmers sit on our board and they come to our board meetings. And so we have 2 board meetings in Britain, and 1 in America and 1 in Ghana. And they get full access to all the information that directors on boards get, and they make the decisions about remuneration and the directions, the strategy of the company. So we're accountable to them for the performance of the company that they own. And ultimately, I suppose they can sack me if they don't think I'm doing a good job. And so one of the things that I do is I go to Ghana to their annual general meeting, which is their gathering where they have a lot of the farmers turn up from each of the villages, and I report to them on how their company is doing, and they then could have questions for me. I also bring chocolate with me, because one of the things that's interesting is that despite the fact that they spend all their time growing cocoa, they've actually never tasted chocolate, so they don't know where it's going. But we also do print our annual report in the form of a calendar to be put up in the cocoa sheds in each of the villages, so that all members of COPPA have the right to see how their company's going. So that's how we report to them. They then, obviously, when they come to our meetings, and also when they come over to represent themselves, to talk to consumers and to talk to people who work in shops and people who are politicians and things, then they describe the things that they've invested their money in, and they've got a website, and they say what their principles are and what programmes they've been doing at the moment and things. So they report for themselves on what it is they've decided to spend their money on. So the cooperative in Ghana has more than 85,000 members, and they're organised in 1,257 villages, which are then organised in 57 districts, and this is in remote rural Ghana, which is, so cocoa grows in the rainforest, so you're talking about proper rainforest, proper rural areas. And so running a democratic organisation in that environment is very challenging, because they don't have access to running water, let alone computers, and also there is very high levels of illiteracy in among the farmers. So they really are having to do something where they're present at meetings, and then people are taking minutes from those meetings, and people are making sure all those things happen. And so it's quite a challenge to run a democratic organisation in that environment, but they're doing, I think, a good job. So consumers have been very important to Divine, so we wouldn't be here today unless people had actually gone into shops and asked for products that weren't there, which is a bit unusual. So we got people very early on to go into shops and actually say that they'd buy Divine if the shop would stock it, and that really worked. I mean, so we did it in a proper organised fashion. So consumers have been really part of our story, and really what's close to my heart is the idea that I want to bring consumers and producers closer together. I want them to both benefit from a better relationship. When we started, awareness of fair trade and where things came from was much lower, so it was at about 7% 17 years ago. And the awareness on fair trade is now at about 90% in Britain, so the awareness is much more higher. And I think that young people today have gone through an education system where they've really looked at where things come from and who gets the benefits. So I do think that young people are much more aware of the impact of the products and services that they buy. I think they're also demanding something, they expect something from companies more, and I think a good example at the moment would be where they're calling companies to pay appropriate taxes in the countries that they work in. So I think that would be a good example. I think they're expecting more accountability and transparency, both of the companies that they buy things from, but also for the companies that they work for. So I think that companies that are more progressive in terms of accountability and transparency are attracting the talent, and I think that's very important. But not to put, the counter to that is they're very easily seduced by easy availability and cheapness. so those two things work against each other in a way. We were incorporated in '98 and our first products came to market at the beginning of '99. And then what we've done is, working with other stakeholders, we've managed to do everything you've needed to do to survive and then thrive. And so that thing at the beginning of actually trying to build a brand and trying to have enough turnover to cover your costs was very challenging, and some of the things that we did to manage to do that were quite unusual. So we supplied the own brand for cooperative. So the cooperative in 2002 converted all of their own brand chocolate to Fairtrade, and they bought it from us, which was extraordinary. And they bought it from us because they wanted to work with a cooperative in Ghana, so they liked the fact that we were owned by a cooperative in Ghana. But it was extraordinary because we were tiny, so to take an own brand contract from a tiny organisation that wasn't a manufacturer was unheard of. And so they did that, and that gave us then the volume which enabled us to have the time to build a brand. And so then over time we've built the brand which is Divine. And so we broke even in 2006. We paid out a profit in 2006 to the farmers, so that was a really proud moment to hand over a profit dividend. And then in 2007 we incorporated in America, and then we've worked for about 6 years in America, and we finally broke a profit in America in 2014-15, and so we're now running a profitable and growing business in America as well as a profitable business in the UK. And then the final piece of support that made it possible in the beginning was that the Department for International Development did a loan guarantee. And that was a completely unusual piece of support because it isn't money, so they didn't give us the money. They did us the guarantee, which meant the bank would loan us the money. And it meant that we developed a really good relationship with the bank with competitive rates of interest because of the fact that the Department for International Development was guaranteeing that loan. And they did that from their poverty alleviation programme and from their Ghana desk because they recognised the benefits that we would deliver for farmers in Ghana. So that we fitted in with their mission. And so that was quite an extraordinary piece of cooperation. And it's worked because we've paid back the loan, we've paid the interest on the loan, we've paid premiums to farmers, we've paid dividends to farmers, and then we've also paid VAT on every single bar of chocolate that we've sold, and we've paid corporation tax. So working in the UK and working in the US has been quite different, but in surprising ways. So when we started Divine in the UK back in 1999, even using the word farmer was quite complicated. And so that what people's perception of farmers in Britain, we're an urban nation, it wasn't, we sort of thought of them as landowners, as people who got great big common agricultural subsidies. They weren't people that we were worried about and cared about. Whereas when you go to America, actually, this is a country that has a huge amount of agriculture, and people like farmers and they want to support farmers. So that was an interesting difference. And then the other difference was actually the idea of company ownership as a solution. And so that in Britain, in some ways, we suspect people who own companies. We suspect rich people. We're suspicious of them. And so the idea that the farmers are going to own the company as part of the solution didn't necessarily mean anything to them, and therefore they didn't actually hear us saying it. So although we're saying it everywhere, and it's in all the press cuttings and all our printed materials and on our website, you could sit down and talk to somebody 15 years later, tell them about the fact that the farmers owned it, and they went, I never knew that, and I love Divine. And so that actually they just didn't hear it. Whereas in America, the American dream is to set up your own company and earn your way out of poverty. So actually in some ways the model had much more resonance, both in terms of farmer ownership and farmers, in an American context. From an operational perspective, one of the things that we've done is that all our manufacturing has stayed the same. So we haven't done different manufacturing for America because we haven't yet got to a scale which that makes sense. So we're still, the bars of chocolate are manufactured in Germany, are shipped to the UK and shipped to America. And then things like seasonal products like advent calendars and chocolate money, we get the economy of scale of manufacturing for Britain and America at the same time and then shipping stuff on to America. So we haven't yet got an experience of manufacturing in America. Obviously, when we set up, the development targets were Millennium Development Goals. and what has now preceded the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. And there is some very interesting questions about how can business help deliver on Sustainable Development Goals. And so as Divine, we've really looked at those things and sort of, in a way, we tick lots of boxes because we work with farmers on the ground and we are about poverty alleviation and we try and help the farmers adapt to the changing climate and things. But so we sort of tick quite a lot of the boxes, but what are the ones that we think are really important to us? And we're very keen on the ones that are about good governance, because we do think that if farmers can be organised, then actually the world's their oyster. So we really want to focus on the one that's Goal 16, which is about setting up good governance organisations. And then we're all very interested in Goal 5, which is about the equality of women, because we think that if you can empower women and help them become, good and effective cocoa farmers, then they can become active players in their communities and can actually turn around their communities. So we've sort of said we obviously deliver on lots of these goals, but we think those ones are important. And we hope that in the future, other businesses will also really engage in their core business with the Sustainable Development Goals so that we can achieve them. So the biggest challenge at the moment, so we operate in a number of territories, but the retail environment in the UK is very challenging. So post the financial crisis, the way that supermarkets are behaving, the way that the discounters have come in from Germany and are challenging the way that supermarkets in Britain were run, is making it quite difficult to get on the shelf. So that's a big challenge. Well, another impact of the financial crisis has been that you've seen much more volatility in both exchange rates and in commodity prices. And so that we buy our chocolate, it's manufactured in Germany, so we pay for it in euros and then we sell it in pounds and we sell it in dollars. So we're completely exposed to the exchange rate. And so that's a big thing to have to manage. And then commodity prices obviously actually change the cost of goods. And so you're having to manage those things as well. And so as you get bigger, you're more able to cushion yourself from those things. And so as a small company, that's much more challenging, partly because you don't have good access to information. So when is a good time to buy forward currency? And so that's also a big challenge. I think then another challenge that we're seeing is the consolidation in the chocolate industry. And so over the period that I've been working, the last 17 years, you've seen the bigger companies eat up each other, sort of in a way. So the obvious one is that Kraft bought Cadbury's. So in a £4 billion market in the UK, there are now 3 players owning 80% of that market. That's challenging because they control the shelf. But behind them, so you as a consumer in Britain know retail brands, so you know Mars and you know Cadbury's and you know Nestle doing Kit Kat bars. But you don't know the big operators that are the primary processors. They're the sort of agribusiness that works in chocolate. And so the 2 biggest players in that are Barry Callebaut and Cargill. And Barry Callebaut probably now produces half of the chocolate manufactured in the world. And you don't even know who they are. And that's quite challenging for us as a small player who wants to do traceable manufacturing, because it means there's less and less places that we can do those traceable batches and everything's becoming much more homogenous. And it also means that they've got an economy of scale that makes us look very uneconomic. And so I think they're probably the biggest challenges that we have. It's interesting how real they are, actually. I mean, those challenges, so I haven't got training, I don't have a business degree, I've got a philosophy degree. And so the idea, I realised one day that I was taking a decision about buying €6 million. And I was taking the decision of whether today was the day to buy it. Was the exchange rate right? And it was like, how did I ever get here? That this was the decision I was making. I thought I was selling chocolate. My sort of background is marketing. And here I am making a decision about this is a good day to spend that money. And it makes a difference because tomorrow I buy it and it might be £100,000 better. And so that's quite a big thing for a small company.